using all the terms, but we're in GMP facility, which means good manufacturing practices, which is this like international standard that's set, that has very specific rules, its own black book, Bible, whatever you want to call it, of all of the very specific rules that one must follow.
When a donor is initially screened, it is not the end of their screening journey, because one of the things that we're doing is we're doing daily screening. Every time a donor provides a stool sample, they are screened for that day for any health changes that happened since the last time they were screened.
4,000 years ago, and this was initially being done in 4th century China, I think things were done quite differently.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of Biome Breakthroughs. And today we're going to talk about, I think, kind of the central point that I think it's important for everyone to understand about fecal microbiota transplantation, or FMT. So we're really excited that you're joining us. And if this is your first episode, this is a great one to join in on, because we're going to kind of cover the basics and kind of get you to understand where we sit in the FMT space and what the important things to understand about FMT are. As well, if you want to keep making sure you don't miss any of these episodes, please follow along, hit the bell, subscribe, all of the other words that mean subscribing and making sure you're not missing anything. And again, if you have a topic or an interest that you think we should touch on, please post a comment so we can make sure we get to those topics as well. And if you're a doctor or a healthcare professional and you have something you'd like to add to the conversation, reach out to us, because we're always looking for someone to join us here and talk about these fun topics with us, so it's not just the two of us all the time.
Although we are exciting. Yeah, I'm really excited today to cover FMT safety. It's a really important question. And if you're a patient and you're wondering about getting the procedure, this will be awesome for you. If you're a doctor and you're interested in potentially treating patients with FMT, then this will also be of interest to you and something that you'll need to be able to answer to the patients that are coming to you. Informed consent is, of course, a part of every good medical procedure, and FMT is no different. We're not going to be covering the informed consent process today, because that's pretty dry and legal, but we do want to cover a little bit more about the evolution that FMT, the treatment has gone through, as well as the manufacturing standards that have changed over time. At one point, 4,000 years ago, and this was initially being done in 4th century China, I think things were done quite differently, very differently, frankly. It would be very cool to see what that documented process was. But to the point where it is today, it's become a very, I don't want to say sterile, because it's not a sterile process from the true sense of the word, but it's improved a lot from the donor selection standards, the manufacturing and quality control standards. The regulatory oversight has changed a lot in the last decade even. And so that has changed a lot of the potential risks and allowed us to mitigate things. In fact, I was speaking with a doctor who's become a clinical partner with Novel Biome and allowing, getting access to our FMT products for his patient population. And he's been in the treatment space for a long time. I mean, he started actually offering FMTs in the 1980s, which sounds like a very long time ago. And is quite a while ago in the context of having practiced for that length of time. And he was telling me about back then, they joked and called FMTs shit shakes, which is both comical and also a little bit disturbing. And that was really the way that things were done. Doctors were mixing up these shakes, let's call them, in their back office with very little oversight from a donor screening standpoint, very little, quality control or manufacturing standards, and little or no oversight at all from a regulatory standpoint. And so while that's allowed FMT to get to the place where it is today, and it really created the track record of effectiveness, especially in the context of C. diff, which was really critical, and now getting to the point where a lot of Western developed countries are approving the C. diff indication with a lot more research coming. It is important that we've made changes to the way that the standards are the standards that are being followed. And so we'd like to cover a little bit more of that today, and how Novel Biome fits into that, and how in some cases we're really setting the pace for the new standards that will be developed as far as how FMT should be processed, the types of treatment protocols that are being developed, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that the understanding and the focus on FMT safety is growing as it becomes more widely used, and as the kind of the exponential growth in research and treatment possibilities for FMT. So for anyone that doesn't know, because if this is your first time joining us, fecal microbiota transplantation, or FMT, basically you're taking a really well screened donor, capturing their gut microbiome from their stool, which is then processed and purified, and then that gut microbiome, those bacteria and other microbiota, are captured in capsules, in an enema, in colonoscopy, and then given to someone who has gut dysbiosis or their gut dysfunction that's causing some other outward issues, to help restore gut health and rebalance the gut microbiome. And so you can see in that explanation why you'd really want to focus on the donors there, because they're playing a big role. It's all really about the donors in terms of what the product is. And so one of the biggest changes, and I think something that's constantly evolving, is the rigor of FMT screening in terms of the donor. And part of this comes from some of the earlier days where things weren't being accounted for. So you have things like antibiotic resistant bacteria is not being screened for, and that transferring to a patient. Or in really early times, traits like lifestyle traits, so like obesity or poor health, that transferring to a patient from the donor. And so in those instances, as terrible those were, we learned a lot about how important it is to really understand not only the health of the donor, but what kind of genetic traits they may have, which could pass on, as well as what types of bacteria that exist within the donor. And so that's where these donor screening has kind of upped the game. And us at Novel Biome, we like to try to expand that, really understand anything that we know the gut plays a role in, we like to screen out from our donors. And that's from them as well as their immediate family, because we know, sometimes it skips a person, but it could get transferred to a patient. And so when we talk about donor screening, we look initially, the first step is always health screening. So that's health and wellness screening, anything that the donor, health conditions the donor might have. For us, we're looking at the method of birth, because we know that vaginally born is better than C-section in terms of the gut microbiome health, the type of diet they have, how long they were breastfed, how much exercise they do, down to, if they or their immediate family has any cancers, neurological issues, and neurodevelopmental, and the list goes on. So we're screening out over 100 factors in just their general health reporting. And so that is the first step. And it's about 1 or 2% of people get through just that initial health screening. And because if you stop to think, if you could think of someone you would want to take all of their health and well-being and put it in your body, how many people do you know that you would go 100%, I'd want everything that person has? Because it's hard. We even talk with people that it's like, I don't know anyone who could be a donor. I also don't know anyone could be a donor, other than the fact that I know our donors. But in my day-to-day life, I don't know anybody, because they're so rare. They are the unicorns of the general health. And so when we move on.
Another aspect of this, and I've seen this clinically, and for some context here to some of our newer listeners, I used to treat a lot of patients with FMT. So treated, in collaboration with other healthcare providers, hundreds of patients, and having spoke to thousands of people about FMT, both clinicians and people that are doing the procedure themselves. And so the home DIY FMT really, has been around for a long time, especially when, the FDA started restricting access to FMT products on the market back in about 2013, when they realized, wait a minute, this doesn't have much regulatory oversight. There is a potential for risk. And so we need to control this more tightly. And so as a part of doing that, there became the sort of underworld FMT DIYers, as they call themselves. And, although I don't think that that's an appropriate thing to do, I totally understand a patient who feels desperate enough that they're willing to do that because they're unable to get access to high quality, safe FMT at reasonable prices. And so I totally get it, but I really caution anybody who's considering that against it for the very reason that the rigor that is required to ensure, as Shayna is pointing out, that you're getting all these health benefits. As you can get the health benefits, you can also get the negative health outcomes that these patients have. And a perfect example of someone that I spoke to, this was several years ago, she decided to do FMT and she used her sister's boyfriend, and then came to find out later on that he smoked, he drank a lot, and he also happened to have H. pylori. And so she ended up getting H. pylori, and then her health deteriorated even more. And that's very common in healthy people who are generally robust. They can have infections and pathogens in their body, and they'll not even have an obvious symptom. But when you're in a vulnerable health state, you've been chronically ill for a long time, your immune system is completely dysregulated, you're dealing with potentially autoimmunity or, IBD or other, pretty severe health issues, you're not going to be able to tolerate FMT from a poorly screened donor. You're not going to do well when you're exposed to H. pylori. You're going to start getting symptoms. And so this poor woman's health just deteriorated even further following FMT. And of the few safety reports, it's typically come from a poorly screened donor, or the standards of donor screening at the time, as you mentioned at the top of this, just weren't high enough, where they weren't testing for antibiotic resistance, for example. And again, that's an example of a situation where someone who's very healthy generally can have an antibiotic resistant bacteria. They're fine. They're not sick. They're not having an infection that's obvious. But for someone who is sick, who is unwell, they're going to have a problem with that. And that's where, that distinction is really important to make.
Yeah. And so that's where that second. So we do this health screening, and then we go into blood and stool screening. And we're screening for so many things in blood and stool. And we're looking at any kind of infectious diseases, gut pathogens, anything that could cause potential risk to a recipient. And one of the key things that you're hitting on, Jason, is that there are a lot of healthy people who are carriers for a lot of unhealthy things. So they are fine. Their body is not reacting to it. It exists in their body, but it's not at a level, or it's not impacting their health. But when you do these stool and blood screenings, we're seeing that really healthy people often are carriers for antibiotic resistance or different types of infectious bacteria, but it's not impacting their health. So if we just did a health and wellness screening, some people would look pretty good on paper. And then when we go one step further, we realize, okay, so that this would, endanger a patient, or they're a carrier for something. And for some of these cases, they'll always be a carrier. So if you are a carrier for antibiotic resistant bacteria, you're pretty much always going to be. So we've had donors that looked great on paper and then fail their blood or stool screening because they are a carrier for something. And so this is one further screening where you're losing of that 1% to 2% who have a good medical history and lifestyle. They may not pass the blood and stool screening. And then we take it one step further. And then we also do a physical exam as well to make sure that everybody is what they say they are, that they are actually healthy, that there's no other issues that could be something that could be carried on. And we're thinking even just some things with your skin and things like that could be indicative
psoriasis, eczema,
yeah,
hair loss. There's a lot of things that you could observe. And the physical really is a full body, head to toe, to make sure we're covering all the bases there.
And I think one thing that maybe isn't common knowledge in terms of this world is that when a donor is initially screened, it is not the end of their screening journey. Because one of the things that we're doing is we're doing daily screening. Every time a donor provides a stool sample, they are screened for that day for any health changes that happened since the last time they were screened, which sometimes was yesterday. So we're doing these constant things, ensuring that they don't have a cold that day, that they don't have an upset tummy. We want to know everything about them and ensure that there's no health changes. And then every 3 months, they are do all of that blood and stool screening again to ensure that in that 3-month period, they haven't contracted anything, there hasn't been anything that's happened, or their wellness hasn't changed or they haven't become a carrier for something. And that's one of the safety measures that's put in place for FMT screening. Because it is a biologic that comes from a human, there are some more complications in terms of ensuring oversight. And so what we do here is that basically product made in that 3-month window is held until we get the second test results. And we know that within that 3-month window, that nothing that we're screening out has occurred. And that allows us to then know that that product at least doesn't contain anything we're screening for. And then we have that daily health and wellness, because if a donor submits a sample, but they have a cold that day, or they feel nauseous, or they have GI symptoms, then no product is made from that time period. And then within a window that covers, we'll give them time so that we know that whatever that is could pass. And then again, of course, we have more blood and stool screening. So it's kind of, there's a lot of oversight in terms of ensuring that our donors aren't carrying anything.
Right. And we're only talking about, 25% of all of the details that go into it, because we don't want to bore you. We want to keep a high level. And I think, that sort of following the journey, manufacturing and quality control is sort of the next big part of what allows for safety. And so, using all the terms, but we're in a GMP facility, which means good manufacturing practices, which is this like international standard that's set, that has very specific rules, its own black book, Bible, whatever you want to call it, of all of the very specific rules that one must follow. And that those rules, have regulatory oversight, meaning Health Canada is doing regular audits and inspections of our facility, all of our documentation, all of our SOPs, to ensure that we continue to be compliant against that rule set. And so, having this third party who is reviewing everything that we're doing, so we're not just saying, yeah, we're creating this great product in a great facility, which we believe we are, but we have someone else who's actually validating that and saying, yes, you are doing that. You're following this black book of rules. And really the key aspects of a GMP facility are both a production department that is following a very specific process that has a lot of validation along the way, and then the quality department, which is ensuring everything from a quality and a safety standpoint is being done. And maybe you want to go into a little more detail as to what that means. But ultimately, every batch has testing before it gets produced, has testing during the manufacturing steps. It has testing at the end, and then there's a final release process. And all of this stuff is documented with every person who's doing anything in that process, making sure that they're trained, making sure that they're signing off on it, that there's someone who reviewed what they did, even some steps requiring a second person to watch while they're doing it if they're critical to the manufacturing. And then the quality department is very separate from production, so there's no real crosstalk as far as what they're doing. Of course, there's crosstalk, like actual verbal talking, because they have to approve and they have to release and they have to do a lot of these things. So it just requires a lot of documentation. But even the actual lab space itself is constantly, we're testing the water to ensure that it's within the standards that we're setting from a bacterial count. We're testing the rooms that the product is manufactured in to make sure environmentally we're not introducing anything. And there's a constant schedule. And then every batch has samples of both raw material and finished product that are held as retention samples. So we can always go back and test those if there's anything that's wrong. Everything, including the bottles, the capsules, anything that might touch or go into the product is retained so that we can always go back and test. And then every of the suppliers who gives us any of those things, we have an agreement with them and we do audits on them on a routine basis to ensure that they're following all of their standards. And as you can imagine, we just get this massive web and there's documentation along every step of this web. And it's really a fascinating thing and something that is kind of exciting when you can step back and appreciate the beauty of it, but also the importance of it. Because at the end of the day, this product is being released to a clinician, a physician, a doctor, a clinic, a hospital, and they want to know when they're discussing with their patient that this is not only going to be effective for them, but that it's going to be the most likely to be safe. And that ultimately is the most important, right? If you're sick, you're unwell, you don't want to get more sick. You don't want to develop additional diseases or additional symptoms. And so having that safety piece really dialed in such a tight process is critical. So I'll leave the rest of it to you if you have anything else to cover on that.
Yeah. So I think in thinking about donor screening, that's going to impact that's what the product is made out of. Manufacturing oversight. So that being in terms of following GMP practices, falling under a health regulator that has oversight, and the kind of ecosystem that exists around production of a pharmaceutical. And that's, I think, an important thing to see a shift in the understanding of what FMT is. It is being considered and manufactured under pharmaceutical standards. So if you trust other drugs, people that have those licenses that are working with the regulators that are clearing these levels, they're following the same standards that are put in place for our pharmaceutical. And it's important to understand we're working from stool to bacteria to a product, but we're falling under the same level of scrutiny as a pharmaceutical. And so I think it's understanding how much oversight is in there, how much gymnastics is done to ensure that we can fall under those things and still keep bacteria viable. And so part of that is, we're ensuring that our product is going to be effective regularly through our testing. So part of our product release is to ensuring the product is consistently meeting the standards. So it is the same type or level of product every time, keeping that variability down to a minimum because we don't want one batch to be great and the next batch to be not. And that's part of these manufacturing standards is that doesn't happen. It can't, because our quality team is ensuring that if we say our product can do something, it is going to do something. It is going to meet that same standard. It's going to go through the same hoops every time. And some of the really amazing part of this is every piece of critical equipment is tested and made sure that it meets that standard. Every time we say that this is a critical step, well, someone's watching in the room, making sure the person doing that critical step is doing exactly what they said they were going to do. And then when the product is done, we have a separate team that comes in and does that evaluation, because we want to keep the people who are making the product, who become bonded to it and love it so dearly during that production process. Someone else is doing the testing to say, yeah, everything, all those levels that production said they did, and they go to those standards. And so not only do we have these systems in place, everything is documented. So when we have a regulator come in, they can go, last Tuesday, what happened? And we can go, here's everything that we did. Here's everything that was documented. And it's to the level of before pieces of paper leave a certain room, which is locked, that one person has a key to, someone specifically tracking that paperwork to make sure that everything that came in is tracked from, let's test and make sure that the raw stool is good. Let's make sure all the production steps were met and verified. And then we also make sure that all of that secondary testing for release is also done. And that's what's happening for every pharmaceutical. That's the world that kind of this oversight lives in. And I think it's important to shift, our understanding that FMT is considered a biologic drug. And because of that, it falls under all of those same regulatory steps. And so between donor screening and these manufacturing standards, we kind of have a better understanding of what that product is, what the safety of it is, as well as how consistent and effective it is going to be, because these standards exist to ensure that it's always going to be the same. And I think for a long time, FMT wasn't thought of that way. And being honest, it didn't always have these standards. And so it probably wasn't to the level that it is today. But now it's falling under regulators. Now we are going to those same standards, getting the same testing and evaluations done. And we're proving very similar or the same things that would be done for a standard pharmaceutical. Now, we live in a little bit of a different space because a lot of your standard pharmaceuticals are sterile and we don't work in sterile. So that's where kind of some of the how does it fit into a non-sterile? Because we are a viable bacteria, we don't want to kill the bacteria. That would negate the whole point. So how do we put that in place as well? And so all of that falls on us to work with regulators to go, okay, this is how we would do this. And we go back and forth to make sure that it fits within what they want and does allow the product to do what it wants to do. So it isn't an easy thing, but I think that we are more confident in this space saying we know everything about every minute that this product was made. And we kind of, with that, get more, confidence
Right.
in what we're saying about our product, which I think
Yeah, and
is
I think another, I alluded to it, but having been a part of treating so many patients, it's given us the appreciation of how to develop protocols. We have several different product types that are more applicable to certain patients over others, depending on their disease, depending on whether they can swallow capsules or not. And I think that's a huge part of also what allows for safety is really understanding and helping the physicians that we're working with develop and implement protocols that they can work with in their clinical practice and or their research studies or whatever they're doing depending on their country or regulatory environment. And so that's, I think, another arm of this is just really making sure that from the delivery mechanism, we're choosing a path that's suitable to that patient, that's going to have the likelihood of both getting the outcome we're hoping for, but also being safe and effective for them. And so I think that's another important aspect. And frankly, I'm really excited about the future that is FMT. I do think that more companies are entering into this space than any time in the past, 15, 20 years. The study of the microbiome is expanding dramatically at a really impressive pace. And I do think we're going to get to the point where we're going to try to simulate what is in a healthy FMT donor microbiome to something that we can grow in a lab, which is both exciting and scary at the same time. And perhaps we'll achieve that end, or maybe we won't. And we'll have to continue to rely on a donor model. The other great opportunity that I think has a lot of promise and something that we hope to play a role in the future is actually better understanding how we can choose who's going to be a suitable patient, right? Be able to test a patient's microbiome and say, you're going to be a good candidate for FMT because you have these specific parameters that are lacking. And we can give you a donor who's going to offset these parameters or reductions in bacteria count or diversity and give that to you. I think that's going to be a really exciting future, which is basically matching a patient to a donor. But before even matching them, deciding, are you going to be a responder? Are you likely to respond? And that's happening in the pharma space in a much bigger way than it ever has in the past. In the past, you just relied on, oh, well, this drug was studied in this population, it got this outcome. But now we're starting to say, well, okay, here's tests that we can do to decide, are you going to be a responder to this chemotherapeutic based on the genetics of the disease that you have? Are you going to be able to respond? And if you're not, what can we do to shift your body or your epigenetics in such a way that you're going to respond to this treatment and get a potentially better outcome and for it to be safe, right? If you're not going to be a responder, it can be harmful. In the context of FMT, it's harmless. Ultimately, if you're doing FMT, the worst case scenario is you're going to get no outcome. You're not going to get better. And of course, that's not ideal. But in some cases, with very toxic drugs, take chemotherapy, if it's not working for you, it could kill you. And so it is important to make sure that this can work. And so I think that's the future. And I'm really excited to see that come to play, although our focus primarily is supporting doctors and clinics and hopefully in time researchers integrate this great product into their protocols. And ultimately what they want to know is this safe? And I think today in our video, we've more than covered this topic. And there's a lot of, trials out there that have reviewed all of the data. And the great piece that we always want to see at the bottom of the study is generally safe, generally effective. And they always say is, and we need to do more research. And so the research never ends. But on that point, and even in my own career of treating hundreds of patients, the safety profile and combined with the efficacy has always been really, really high. And at no point in the past am I as confident as I am today about the standards that we're both meeting as a company, the standards that we're being held to by Health Canada as our oversight regulators, and the amazing team that we've compiled here to produce the product and ultimately release it to the clinical market.
And I think there's a lot of other back end stuff that happens after you produce a product. So, tracking adverse events, ensuring we're able to recall product if ever necessary, that we can do secondary testing, which we touched on. So there's a lot of other things after we make the product that helps ensure safety. And when we're looking at the research, the consistency that says that FMT was safe within, and we're looking at cancer patients, people with Parkinson's, people with C. diff, people with multiple sclerosis, all of these research studies that are being done that consistently are indicating that, dependent on the outcomes, almost all of them, their first concern or first report is, was it safe in this population? And we're consistently seeing that it is. And I mean, there are mild side effects, and that's part of pretty much every drug. And the beauty about FMT is they tend to resolve on their own. And so, we have a good understanding of how the product impacts people and what kind of safety and rigor is involved in creating it. And I think we're going to see more growth in what FMT is being used for. And I think as we learn more and more about how its safety profile looks, I think it allows us to extend where we're going to research it and look at it. And I think the regulatory oversight that's been added in, I think, provides a great framework to allow for ensuring safety when this is being applied. And of course, the other thing that I always think is important when we're looking at safety or understanding is education, or understanding exactly what the drug is supposed to do and how to ensure it's used properly. And that's something that, because we have experience in treating patients, but we also have extensive experience in creating these products and doing them a little bit different so that they're more accessible to larger patient populations, is ensuring that we can help guide people in where to find information or what kind of education is necessary when they're trying to implement this. So, doctors educating patients, as well as people who are manufacturing medications, educating the people who are using it and providing kind of context and as much transparency as possible. And then we get back to the loop is ensuring there's informed consent. And that's something that, is always used. But FMT is no different, that, patients should be educated and provide informed consent when taking on using this drug as any other drug. And I think reframing our thought of FMT in terms of it being a pharmaceutical drug is a really important part, because you start to see the rigor placed in where you're getting your FMT from, as well as ensuring that, these safety things are in place when you're looking at where the drug is coming from.
Kudos.
And so if you're a healthcare professional and this sounded really interesting, or you have many more questions from what we've talked about, please reach out to us. We are here as a resource, and we want everyone to understand kind of the amazing nature of what FMT is, and the importance of gut health. And if you are a patient and you came across this, talk to your healthcare professional so you can fully understand. And if you have any questions about this, you can always nudge your healthcare professional our way so that they can ask questions and we can help clarify anything to them.
Awesome. See you guys on the next one.
Yeah, and thank you for joining us. And make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss the next exciting episode. Thanks, everybody.